I spent most of my life pouring myself into others, time, care, money, love, until I barely recognized the woman left behind. It was supposed to be a simple dinner that night, just family, though even that word had started to feel foreign. I remember the house glowing with candlelight, the table heavy with food I'd bought and cooked, the air full of the scent of rosemary and roast chicken. The laughter came easy to them. It always did. Then, between clinking glasses and Olivia's polished smile, came the moment that cracked something inside me forever. "And you are?" her mother asked, turning toward me with polite curiosity that sliced like glass. Olivia didn't miss a beat. She laughed. "Oh, that's Margaret. Our unofficial housekeeper keeps everything running, don't you, Mags?" They laughed, even my son. And I, standing there with an empty wine bottle in hand, just smiled like it didn't gut me, like the floor beneath my feet hadn't vanished, like I hadn't just been erased in my own home. I excused myself, set the bottle down, and walked toward my bedroom, their laughter echoing behind me. Not one voice corrected her. Not one said, "That's my mother." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the door I had painted myself when we first moved in. The same door I'd opened for Ethan when he came home from college, when he introduced me to Olivia, when I thought we were building something together. I had paid for every brick, every tile, every piece of furniture. And somehow, I had become invisible. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I brewed coffee like always, fed the cat, and waited for Olivia to come down in her expensive yoga gear, her phone glued to her hand. When she finally looked up, I handed her a small ring of keys. "What's this?" she asked. I smiled. "Good luck paying the mortgage." Her confusion didn't matter. My clarity did. I walked past her, past the framed photos, the furniture, the ghosts of who I used to be. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly. Because the truth about clarity is, it doesn't shout, it whispers. And that morning it told me, "You're done." I didn't look back as I drove away. The morning light was pale, washed out, like even the sun hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. My hands shook on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from something I couldn't yet name. Freedom, maybe. Or the first sting of it. By the time I reached the small apartment my great-aunt Ruth had left me years ago, my body felt like it was made of sand. Soft, collapsing, impossible to hold together. The place smelled like dust and old wallpaper. The kind of smell time leaves behind when no one's been there to open the windows. I dropped my purse on the counter and just stood there, listening to the silence. Not peaceful silence. The heavy kind that presses against your chest, the kind that makes you realize how loud your life used to be. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the kitchen floor, my back against the cold cabinets, staring at the faint light spilling through the blinds. For the first time in years, no one needed anything from me. No errands to run, no dinner to cook, no voice calling. "Mom?" From down the hall, you'd think that would feel like relief. It didn't. It felt like standing in the wreckage after a storm and realizing the house you built never really belonged to you. The next few days blurred together. I slept on the couch because the bed frame in the bedroom was broken. I ate whatever I could make in a microwave. Instant soup, toast, tea that tasted like cardboard. I checked my phone more times than I'll admit. Nothing. Not a single message. Ethan didn't text. Olivia didn't call. The silence became its own kind of answer. Maybe she told him not to reach out. Or maybe he just didn't want to. I thought about that dinner over and over, the laughter, the way he'd smiled when they called me the maid. I used to believe that kind of thing couldn't happen overnight. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe it happens one small moment at a time, until one day you're standing in a room full of people who stopped seeing you years ago. One night, unable to sleep, I found a half-empty notebook on the shelf and started writing. Just small things at first, memories, fragments, sentences that didn't make sense. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me, for the woman who had disappeared in her own story. For the one who was finally daring to speak again, I wrote until dawn, my handwriting shaking across the page. And when the sun rose, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't done yet. Days melted into weeks. The apartment slowly started to feel less like a tomb and more like a pause, a waiting room between who I had been and who I might become. I filled my hours with little rituals: morning coffee in the chipped mug Ruth had left behind, afternoon walks past the park where no one knew my name, and nights spent writing in that notebook until my wrist ached. There was something soothing about putting words down, even if no one would ever read them. They were my proof of existence. Every line said, I was here, I mattered. One gray afternoon, while looking for a spare light bulb in the storage closet, I noticed an old metal trunk wedged behind a stack of yellowed newspapers. The lock was rusted, the kind of rust that happens when something's been forgotten for decades. It took me 10 minutes and a screwdriver to pry it open. Inside were scraps of Ruth's life: postcards, recipe cards written in her loopy handwriting, an old locket with a faded photo of someone I didn't recognize. But at the very bottom, buried under a folded quilt, was an envelope. My name was written on it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Ruth's. The date in the corner made my heart skip. August 1992, the year Ethan was born. I sat cross-legged on the floor, my fingers trembling as I opened it. Inside were several old documents, hospital discharge papers, copies of medical records, and a letter. I began to read. If you're reading this, it means you came back, and I'm sorry you had to. There's something you deserve to know. At first, the words blurred together. Ruth had been a nurse at the hospital where I gave birth. She wrote about a mix-up, a sudden room change that night, confusion over baby tags, a nurse she didn't recognize signing off on the paperwork. By the time she realized something wasn't right, both infants had already gone home. My pulse pounded in my ears. I read every word, desperate to make it make sense. But then came the final line, the one that stole my breath. I found proof years later, hidden in hospital files. There was a quiet settlement. The boy you raised was not your son. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The room spun around me. I looked down at the photograph tucked behind the letter. A newborn wrapped in a blue blanket, his tag reading Michael Jameson, not Ethan, a name I had never heard before. And in that instant, my world shifted, not with pain, but with clarity. Because for the first time, the pieces of my life started to make a terrible kind of sense. I sat there for hours, surrounded by the wreckage of Ruth's trunk, papers scattered, dust floating through slanted sunlight, the letter trembling in my hands. It felt unreal, like I had slipped into someone else's nightmare. Yet deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "You've known all along." How many times had I looked at Ethan and felt that faint, unexplainable distance? How many moments had I brushed off as mood swings, teenage rebellion, or the coldness that comes from growing up too fast? I used to tell myself love was enough to close that gap, that if I just gave more, tried harder, he'd see me. He never did, and now I knew why. The letter said Ruth had carried the secret for decades. She had doubted herself, afraid of what the truth might destroy, but truth doesn't vanish when ignored. It waits. It festers in silence until it finds a way to surface, even if it has to crawl through time and dust to do it. I spread the documents out across the floor. There were copies of settlement forms, signed by hospital lawyers, a confidentiality clause, a payment to a family named Jameson, and beneath it all, a single sentence from Ruth: "They live nearby. Always have." I pressed a hand to my mouth, choking back a sob. My real son, my son, had grown up just a few miles away. The walls of the apartment felt smaller, the air heavier. Every breath carried memories of Ethan, his first steps, his scraped knees, the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for his school plays, the endless sacrifices I made so he'd never feel the emptiness I had felt growing up. And yet, He had looked right through me, like I was a shadow moving through his house. Maybe he always sensed the truth. Maybe he knew something I didn't. The thought tore through me. I didn't sleep that night. I read the letter again and again until the words were burned into me. By dawn, I wasn't crying anymore. I felt something else, something sharper. Resolve. The woman who had walked out of her home a few days ago was lost, broken, unsure of who she was without her family. The woman sitting on that dusty apartment floor was beginning to remember. I folded the letter, placed it in a clean envelope, and set it on the nightstand. Morning came, gray and quiet. I sat at the small kitchen table, the letter from Ruth beside my coffee cup like an anchor I couldn't untie. I must have read it 100 times by now. Every line carried the weight of a truth that refused to soften with repetition. I typed the name into my laptop, Michael Jamison. There were hundreds of results, a few social media profiles, a business listing, and then one caught my eye, Jamison's Books, a small independent bookstore on Main and Elm. My breath caught. The photo showed a narrow green storefront with big front windows and a wooden sign painted by hand. I zoomed in. There he was, Michael. Mid-30s maybe, clean cut, eyes kind but steady, like someone who listened more than he spoke. He was holding a box of new books, smiling at a customer just out of frame. I stared at that image until my vision blurred. It was like looking at a piece of a life that could have been mine. The thought made my chest ache. I didn't know what to do with the information. I couldn't just walk into that store and say, "I think you're my son." That would shatter more than one life. So I started small. I told myself I'd just see him, just once. That afternoon, I put on my heaviest coat and drove downtown. The bookstore was smaller than I imagined, tucked between a cafe and a florist. Bells jingled softly as I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Paper, coffee, dust, and something like cedar. It was comforting, familiar, like walking into a memory I didn't own. Michael was behind the counter, rearranging a display of poetry books. When he looked up, his eyes met mine. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. He smiled. Polite, warm. "Afternoon. Let me know if you need any help." I managed to nod, pretending to browse. My hands shook as I traced the spines of books I couldn't read. Every second felt like standing too close to a flame. He didn't know me. He couldn't. But somehow I recognized him. In the way he moved, in the careful calm of his voice. It wasn't recognition born of memory, but something deeper, older, something that felt like truth. I left without buying anything. The bells over the door chimed as I stepped back into the cold. My reflection flashed in the window, pale, small, trembling, standing just a few feet from the life I never had. I thought I'd feel closure. Instead, I felt hunger, because seeing him once wasn't enough. Would you like me to continue with Section 6, Echoes of Two Sons, where Margaret begins visiting the bookstore more often and starts uncovering the contrast between Michael's quiet life and Ethan's unraveling world? The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't go back. I even promised it out loud, as if speaking it could make it true. But by the end of the week, I found myself standing across from the bookstore again, paper cup of coffee in hand, pretending to scroll my phone while the world moved around me. Inside, I could see him, Michael, stacking shelves, greeting customers, smiling in that quiet way people do when they actually like the life they've built. I watched the rhythm of his day, the way he leaned in when people spoke, the way he paused before answering, how he laughed softly instead of loudly. It was all so ordinary, and yet to me it was sacred. He looked at peace, and peace was something I had chased my whole life and never caught. At night, I'd sit at my small kitchen table and compare what I saw in him to what I remembered of Ethan. Ethan's laughter always had an edge, like he was afraid of sincerity. Even as a boy, he'd retreat when things got too emotional. I used to think that was just his father in him. Cold, distant, practical. But now I wondered if it was something else entirely, if, on some level, he had always known we didn't fit. I didn't blame him. Not anymore. How could I? I wasn't sure who he was to me now. My son by law, by history, by sacrifice, but not by blood. Not by that invisible thread that ties hearts before they even meet. The line between us had been stitched with effort, not instinct, and the truth was undoing those seams, one by one. Still, I couldn't tell Michael. Not yet. He was living a full life, a good life, one I had no right to rupture. So I just watched from the margins, learning him through the details, the way he locked the door every night at 6, the way he smiled at the florist next door, the way he sometimes sat in the shop window reading long after closing time. He belonged to this world, and I, for the first time, belonged to no one. One evening, as I stood outside the bookstore, the cold biting through my coat, I saw something that stopped me. A woman walked up behind him inside, young, bright-eyed, carrying a box of pastries. He smiled at her, touched her shoulder lightly, and for a split second, I saw my own mannerisms reflected back in him, the same small tilt of the head, the same soft smile. It was like seeing my own ghost living a better life. And that's when I realized I wasn't just mourning the years I lost, I was mourning the years he never had with me. It's strange how silence can make you sharper. When no one expects anything from you, you start noticing everything. The small shifts, the fractures that hide behind smiles. That's what happened to me. While my days revolved around the quiet heartbeat of Michael's bookstore, I began to sense movement in the other half of my life, the one I'd walked away from. It started with a social media post. Olivia, glass of rosé in hand, smiling in a rented spa suite, tagging another self-made empowerment retreat I scrolled past. But then another post came, then another. Her world looked glossy, but something about it felt brittle. Too much polish, too much pretending curiosity can be dangerous, but mine was the steady kind, the kind that had nothing left to lose. I started watching quietly, tracing digital breadcrumbs like a detective public business records, reviews, tax filings. All there if you knew where to look. What I found made my stomach twist. Olivia's company, Ascend Lifestyle Co., was a paper empire rented office, inflated invoices, fake client testimonials. And Ethan, my son, had quit his job 6 months earlier, calling it manifesting a new future. Manifesting. That word used to make me laugh. Now it made me sick. They were living on my house, my credit, my sacrifices, building a kingdom out of cards and calling it success. And all the while, I had been sitting in this tiny apartment, believing I was powerless. But I wasn't. The house was still in my name, every brick of it legally and literally mine. They had no idea that the foundation beneath their perfect life was still held up by my signature. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't sadness. It was power. Quiet, calm, controlled. The kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. I started a second notebook, not like the one filled with grief and confession. This one was clean, deliberate, organized. Dates, names, expenses, proof. Every move Olivia made to keep up her image, every public crack beginning to show. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity taking form. I wasn't plotting to destroy them. I was simply preparing for the moment they'd destroy themselves. And when that happened, I wanted to be ready. Not as the servant in the story they told, but as the author of my own. One night, as I looked through old photos of Ethan and Olivia, a notification flashed on my phone. Ethan had sent a message. "Mom, are you okay?" 7 words, after all this time. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I turned the phone face down. He didn't deserve an answer. Not yet. I didn't reply to Ethan's message. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd learned that silence can speak louder than any apology could. For years, my life had been built on responding to needs, to moods, to guilt. This time, I chose not to. Instead, I poured my energy into rebuilding, piece by piece, the parts of myself I'd neglected. I started walking every morning, no destination, just movement. I bought fresh flowers for the kitchen table. I even began rewriting my notes into something cleaner, a story maybe, or a record, proof that I had survived myself. But the truth still hummed under my skin. Michael existed. My son, the one I never knew, was out there, living an ordinary life that should have been mine to witness each day. I lingered outside his bookstore a little longer, sometimes going in just to browse, sometimes buying a book I didn't need. He always smiled, always greeted me warmly, always asked if I'd found what I was looking for. He didn't know how close he was to being the answer to that question. One afternoon, he rang up my purchase, a weathered collection of essays on forgiveness. "Good choice," he said. "People overlook the quiet kind of healing." I smiled, heart pounding. "That's usually the kind that lasts." For a moment, his expression softened, as if he'd felt something familiar in my voice. The air between us shifted. Recognition? Maybe not in the mind, but somewhere deeper, that invisible place where truth waits to be spoken. When I left the store, I stood outside for a long time, the bag clutched against my chest. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to say, "You don't know me, but you should have." But I didn't. Some truths are too sharp to drop without warning. That night, back in my apartment, I checked the deed to the house again. My name, still printed clearly in black ink. Olivia had tried to refinance. Denied. Ethan had signed as a co-applicant. Also denied. The system had protected me better than either of them ever had. It hit me then. Their perfect life was built on borrowed money and borrowed identity. Mine. All I had to do was stop holding it up. So I called a lawyer. Her voice was steady, practical, uninterested in emotion. She asked for documents. I sent them. She said the house was fully mine and that I could sell it at any time. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there for a long time staring at the phone. The walls around me didn't look so small anymore, because the moment I took back what was mine, legally, emotionally, spiritually, their entire world would come crashing down, and I was finally strong enough to let it. There's a strange calm that comes when you stop waiting for people to understand you. It's like stepping off a stage mid-performance and realizing the applause was never meant for you anyway. That's where I found myself, suspended between what I'd lost and what I was quietly reclaiming. The lawyer filed the paperwork within a week. My name was already on the deed, so the process was simple, clean, and devastatingly final. The house was going on the market. The home they'd turned into a stage set for their illusions would finally be stripped back to wood and foundation, to the truth beneath all that polish. When the notice went out, I was sitting in a cafe near the courthouse, stirring honey into my tea. At 10:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Ethan. I didn't answer. 2 minutes later, another buzz. A message this time. "Mom, please call me. Olivia's freaking out." Of course she was. Olivia's empire had been built on that house, on the image of stability it projected. Without it, everything she'd curated, her lifestyle, her brand, her coaching, would unravel. But I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted silence. I wanted space. I wanted my name to mean something again, not just a signature holding up someone else's dream. A few days later, Ethan came to my door. I saw him through the peephole before he even knocked. He looked older. Not in years, but in the way guilt ages a person. I didn't open it. He knocked again, softer this time. "Mom, please, don't do this." But I had already done it. You see, there's an art to disappearing. It isn't about running away. It's about removing your energy from places that drain you. It's choosing to no longer feed what feeds on you. That night, I sat on the couch and reread Ruth's letter. The paper had started to fray at the edges, but the ink still looked strong. I thought about how she'd carried her guilt for years, how she'd feared the truth would break me. But the truth doesn't break you, lies do. The next morning, I went back to the bookstore. Michael was there, as always. He looked up when I entered and smiled. "Back again," he said. "Couldn't stay away," I replied. He handed me a book wrapped in brown paper. "This one's on me," he said. "You remind me of someone." Someone kind. I smiled, feeling something shift in me. A quiet recognition, like the universe exhaling. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. And for the first time in forever, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I don't know what made that day feel different. Maybe the light, or maybe the silence that had stopped hurting. Whatever it was, I woke up knowing I couldn't keep the truth buried any longer. Secrets have a way of growing heavy, and mine had begun to feel like a second heartbeat. When I arrived at the bookstore, the bell over the door chimed like always. Michael looked up from the counter and smiled. That same gentle, unassuming smile that had undone me every time. "Morning," he said. "You're early today." "I needed to see you," I replied, my voice shaking just enough for him to notice. Concern flickered across his face. "Is everything all right?" I nodded, even though it wasn't. He guided me to the little break room behind the shelves. Mismatched furniture, a humming mini fridge, the faint scent of peppermint tea, the kind of space where truth could breathe. I took the envelope out of my purse, the one I'd opened 100 times, folded and refolded until the creases looked like scars. "I have something to tell you," I said, placing it between us. He hesitated before picking it up. "What is this?" "It's my story and yours." The words came slowly at first, fragile but unstoppable. I told him about the hospital, the mix-up, the settlement, the years I'd spent raising someone else's child, never knowing. I told him about Ruth, about her guilt, about how I'd found the letter and how it had changed everything for a while. He said nothing. "Just read." His hands trembled slightly. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wide, stunned, not with anger, but disbelief. "This can't be real," he whispered. "It is," I said, "and I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. "I don't even know what to feel." "You don't have to," I said softly. "Feel what comes, or nothing at all. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere other than inside me." For a moment, neither of us moved. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room like white noise for grief. Then he reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. "That must have taken everything." And in that moment, something inside me finally loosened. The years of holding, hiding, hoping. I didn't gain a son that day, but I found something rarer. Peace. The world didn't change overnight. There were no dramatic confrontations, no headlines, no apologies big enough to erase the years between us. But something subtle shifted. A stillness that comes only after the truth has been spoken aloud. Michael didn't call for days after that conversation, and I didn't expect him to. He needed space to let it settle. I'd carried this secret for weeks. He'd just inherited a lifetime, so I gave him quiet. The kind that heals instead of hides. Meanwhile, word spread about the house. The sale went through faster than I imagined. The profit came directly to me. Clean, legal, unchallenged. Ethan tried to fight it at first, but paperwork doesn't lie the way people do. Olivia's name wasn't anywhere. Her lawyers couldn't twist what wasn't theirs within a month. Their life unraveled completely. Olivia's business dissolved. Sponsors pulled away. Her curated image of perfection collapsed in the comments section for everyone to see. Ethan moved out of the house before the papers were even signed, his messages shrinking from angry to pleading, then to nothing at all. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply watched from a distance, the way someone might watch a storm pass over a field they once tended. Relieved, but changed. One evening, while I was tidying the apartment, there was a knock at the door. Not frantic, not desperate, just steady. When I opened it, Michael stood there. He looked calm, though his eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd read Ruth's letter for the first time. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I told my parents." My breath caught. And they were shocked, but kind. My mother cried. My father said he'd always wondered why my birth records were missing a page. He looked at me, really looked at me. "I don't know how to make sense of all this, but I don't hate you, I just need time." I nodded. That's all I wanted, time and truth. He smiled faintly. "I don't know what happens next, but if you ever want to come by the store, there's always tea." It was such a small thing, an invitation, a thread, but it was enough. After he left, I sat by the window watching the evening light fade into the city. For the first time in years, my heart wasn't heavy. Grief had turned into something quieter, something that felt a lot like grace. Autumn came quietly that year. The trees outside my window burned gold and amber, and for once I didn't feel the sting of endings. Change no longer frightened me. It felt like breathing. The house sold a week later. The funds landed in my account without ceremony, numbers on a screen replacing decades of memory. I thought it would feel triumphant, but it didn't. It felt still. I realized victory doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just exhales. I took a walk through my old neighborhood before leaving it behind for good. The air smelled like rain and nostalgia. The schoolyard where I'd once waited in the carpool line was smaller than I remembered. The park benches where Ethan used to play were worn and crooked. Life had moved on, and so had I. I stopped in front of the house one last time. A "for sale" sign leaned in the yard, its edges catching the wind. Through the window, I could see faint outlines of where our family photos used to hang, empty frames of laughter and arguments and years I could never get back. But I didn't cry. Not this time. Because I finally understood something. Ruth must have known when she wrote that letter. The truth doesn't destroy you. It strips away what isn't meant to stay. And what's left, though smaller, is real. A few days later, I visited Michael's bookstore again. He looked up from the counter when I walked in, his expression softening into something that felt almost familiar. "Hey," he said, "you came back." I said I would. He poured tea, peppermint, just like the first time we spoke. We sat by the window, watching leaves tumble down the street in lazy spirals. He told me about a community book drive he was organizing, about how he wanted to create a space for people to tell their stories. "Everyone has one," he said. "Most just need permission to speak it." I smiled. "You're right." He glanced at me then, the corners of his mouth lifting. "You should share yours." "I already am," I said quietly, "just one person at a time." We didn't call each other mother and son that day. We didn't have to. What existed between us was delicate, unfinished, but honest. And honesty was enough. When I left, the air outside was soft, the light slanting low across the storefronts. I stood there a moment, looking through the window at Michael arranging a new stack of books. He looked content, whole. And maybe, finally, so was I. I walked away slowly, the city humming around me, strangers passing, lights flickering on, the world unbothered and endlessly alive. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a ghost inside my own story. I felt seen. I felt real. And when I looked up at the fading sky, it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like light.